Hello, friends. I'm very excited to announce our speaker today. It is the one and only Darcy Meehan. Yes, she's my sidekick on this podcast, who's always asking those beautiful questions to the folks coming on. And she is going to speak to us about this new business that she has launched, uh, being a death doula. So I'm going to read her bio today, which is a little bit awkward for me because she's always doing this, but we're gonna make this happen, guys. So I'm going to get started here. So Darcy Meehan, the beautiful Darcy, is a modern day death doula who helps people navigate life's most tender thresholds with clarity, compassion, and grounded support. Her work blends practical end of life planning with emotional and spiritual care. She creates space not only for preparation, but for greater peace and presence right now. A core pillar of Darcy's approach is addressing the anxiety many of us carry around death, uncertainty, and the unknown. By gently bringing structure to what often feels overwhelming, she offers a grounded approach to living well by preparing for what we often avoid, helping people feel more steady, informed, and at ease in their daily lives. Darcy works with those who already know what will bring order and ease, but haven't yet taken steps to prepare yet, as well as those who don't know where to begin, but know it matters to start. Through thoughtful presence and educated experience, she supports people in moving from hesitation to action in ways that feel grounding and meaningful. What Darcy knows for sure is this: there is a way to feel more at ease in life today, and that's by tending to what's ahead of us consciously. So excited, Darcy.
Thank you, Michelle. Always, always, always. It is a little bit, it's very different to be on this side of things. I've been on it with you and interviewing, but always grateful to be here.
Lovely, lovely. Um, well, anytime we get to talk about death together, we tend to just flow with ease. I think it's a very, I have always found it very comforting, and even more comforting being able to talk to you about it.
Mm.
So I'm just really grateful that you took it to this next level and, got certified and have been working really hard to create this container and infrastructure for people to get this level of support.
Mm.
And what I will also share transparently to our audience, in a pretty vulnerable way, is that Darcy was a huge support to my father, in his transition. And I'm super grateful. I think that often, um, and I think there's a lot of shame that can like be held by family members. We can only hold so much space for our family members, especially if they have, dementia like disorders, and they can kind of get paranoid. So it's sometimes to bring in death doulas and other transitional supports, it can be very empowering for the person transitioning and for the family, that they are feeling heard and seen and loved and nurtured and cared for. And I know that she held beautiful space for my father. So thank you, Darcy. Um, I appreciate that. And I'd like to just get started with finding out from you, like, what called you to really kind of hone in on some of this work?
Yeah, that's something that I've asked myself quite a bit when people have asked, what draws me to these kind of, morbid, air quote, like morbid conversations. And I've been fascinated by the duality of life and the dark and the light, and uh, how life can seem to stretch on, and yet it's completely impermanent and everything's temporary. It's just how I'm part of my operating system is that I'm highly curious, and that brings me to both ends of the spectrum of what gives life and what makes life meaningful. And that consistently brings me back to the fact that it is impermanent. And so that requires looking at death and what death means. It's change, it's transition, it's surrender, grief, all of the above. And life has brought me face to face with opportunities to be with those things again and again. And as much as I resist, I can't. I can't fully resist. I have to at some point pause and be with all of those topics. And it's tender and it can be really hard. And I've learned through a lot of earth angels on the way and a lot of practices how to alleviate some of the pain.
Mhm.
And that's brought me more to where I am now. And that I want to support others in alleviating some of the pain or the suffering that's not necessary, so that there can be more love brought in, wherever possible.
Absolutely. I'm recalling this in part of my journey, um, when I was in school working, getting trained under hospice, and just I think there was so much curiosity for me
Mhm.
and people's transition and like life and death, and I was young. I was like in my mid-20s, reflecting on this, and I'm so grateful that you're hitting it um, now and are able to kind of facilitate and support in so many different ways. And so I kind of want to get into that, because Darcy and I have been collaborating and talking about the usefulness, under the Hirschman Clinical Services um, kind of bracket. We've got a lot of clients, particularly families that we work with that sometimes look ahead and want to make sure that things are set up for their loved one, for their adult child. And so Darcy can be a significant resource to families, let alone the client themselves too, when they're kind of beginning to look ahead so that things are set up beautifully. Do you want to talk a little bit to that, Darcy, on some of the pieces that you could be that you work on in addition to so many other realms?
Absolutely. I mean, and I'm going to start with a death doula. Some people are really, there can be this immediate turning away from that term. One, because death immediately either draws people in or it turns people away quickly. And that's one reason I want to be having more conversations to diffuse this discomfort around the word. But also, like, what is a death doula? Because typically a death doula, similar to a birth doula, is someone who's guiding a transition. So with a birth doula, it's non-medical support that's bringing life in, right? Before labor starts, during and after, to tend to not only the new baby, to the mom and the family. Death doula is similar, and it's providing non-medical support to an individual who's moving through a more conscious aging, staging, and death process, but also everybody around them. And that can really look like bedside. It can look like hospice. It can look like what a lot of people imagine. And my approach is pretty different, and that's because of what shows up within HCS and years of coaching and case management, background in therapy, and other trainings and education, is that I see how much avoidance there is about looking at end of life and how much anxiety that brings up in people. And avoiding something that brings up anxiety only adds more anxiety. And when anxiety is high and avoidance is high, all of the coping strategies come out to play. And it's not play, it's harmful, it's chaotic, it's exhausting. And that's part of what we get to do. And it's such an honor, and it can be so challenging. And it's also so navigatable to move through the everyday life stuff. And when it comes to being alive, dealing with mental health, dealing with more complex family systems, uh, having transition plans in place and looking ahead is one of the best investments that can be made. because it alleviates anxiety right now. You know, I think about the future, like I don't feel very much anxiety because I have some key things in place. I know if this happened, there's a game plan. It might not, you know, it's like make plans and God laughs, but still there can be a framework. You can't forecast what's going to come exactly, but by walking through some of the potentials and getting conscious, getting clear, and even practical about if this happened, here's what I would do or what I want to be done on my behalf can be incredibly grounding and also really empowering. So that's a lot of what I bring in with modern day death doula, with bringing this in for people who are in all these different stages, you know?
Yeah, and that's actually, I mean, I'm really glad that you kind of ironed that out. And I started with hospice, and I want to make sure that the audience is clear. I do find that hospice is structured and rigid in their approach, and the death doula, and especially the way that you're going about it, Darcy, you're individualizing, the needs based on each person. Where hospice, they don't do that. They don't individualize. It's a little bit. They have a structure, and the training kind of allows for that. So I just wanted to share that out loud with people, and that's why I think this industry is really very supportive, and particularly Darcy's approach. Just like there's so many therapists out there, and there's different types of life coaches, there's going to be different types of death doulas, and I think it's important for people to get themselves educated on that. And I think with the approach that you're taking, you've got a couple of different prongs. And what I love about the work that you're doing is there's a practicality here that I think is very supportive. And I know it's going to be for me because I don't have all my ducks in a row, and I've got 3 kids, and because there's so many pieces, and there is a state of overwhelm that sometimes, or like push off, like, oh, I'll do it next year, I'll do it next year. And then all of a sudden you don't get to feel empowered in the process. You feel disempowered because you're behind the 8 ball, and now you're, either something tragic happens or you're just not in a good headspace to be making these choices. So I feel like doing it when like ahead of it, can be almost invigorating, to feel like you're taking these steps and it gets to be your way. And so I think what I understand is you help take people through the process, like paperwork wise, kind of being a guide so that people have a voice in the way that they want to be in their transition. Is that correct? Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's so many different paths to walk down, and some may be more existential of I want to feel more neutral when it comes to the idea that I'm changing, that I'm aging, that I'm going to die. I'm in a program right now based on Stephen Levine's book, A Year to Live. And ooh, it's bringing me into the places that I thought I was familiar. And, it turns out there's a lot of new material there of how can I sit with the reality that life is impermanent, and I'm finding new peace in that through having conversation. And that's part of that's one path that I walk down with people is what's going on in the inner world when we bring up the topic or the thought of a loved one dying, whether it's already happened, whether it's going to happen. So there's that processing piece. Because the emotional tending is really important. This isn't just about paperwork. If it was about paperwork, then it would be done already. We would there wouldn't be avoidance around it or anxiety that comes up with it. And then there's the planning. And making a plan, mapping a plan can be very simple, and it can also be very overwhelming. If you think about a map, a photo of a map in the other room, and I think about it, and there are so many details in there when I look up close. But when I step back, I can find my direction pretty well. And it's even beautiful to see all of the details. Could I make that map in the middle of a city, drawing it myself? No. I need outer perspective. And that's where having accountability, having guidance, having a framework, super important. And then there's the practical. And both of those are connected because the practical is part of the planning, but it's also how the plan gets executed over time and how it gets paced. Because this isn't also, it's not about getting it done immediately. This isn't about rushing through a process. It's about moving at a pace that the nervous system can ideally be regulated. That's the aim. That's the aim for everyday life. So it's definitely going to be the aim for planning for later in life.
Yeah, and I some of the conversations we've kind of talked about, like, I mean, there's so many different directions we can go, but like, for example, for me, I have some clarity on the way I want my celebration of life to go, and I think often most people don't, maybe not, or they just don't think about it, like, oh, my kids will deal with it. And what I can say is, I think now that I'm at 50 and I just had the opportunity to celebrate my father, there's just so many different elements, and responsibilities that happen to the family that's left. And so, for me, in reflection, I really want to, well, I want to make it easier for my kids so that they can just actually grieve or whatever they need to go through without all these logistics going on, because there is so much that happens when we pass. Our culture, like, it makes it a little bit complicated, with death certificates and all these silly things. Obviously they're there for a reason, but to be able to, especially for folks out there that do have children or have fur babies, and that's something we're going to talk about in a second, Darcy. I just find it so crucial to be able to, support our loved ones so that they don't have all this responsibility when you pass, because it's already going to be so complicated and difficult emotionally for people. So I think that that's something that you help people with that may not have as much clarity, or there is so much emotion behind it, thinking about it, in advance, especially depending on what age your kids are, when you're reflecting on it. Like, I've got teenage boys, I've thought about it when they were babies, and that was like, I couldn't even talk, like, even considering, right? So I appreciate you holding that space. Do you have anything to say about that?
Absolutely. In the things that aren't tended to, it's it's not that we don't care. It's that it's overwhelming and that emotions are intense, and uh, grief or anticipating grief turns something that's very clear into something that's very cloudy. And that's just normal. That's actually healthy. And even if things are cloudy, moving through is important, and because we can get consumed with the grief and get stuck in it. And that will only pass things on to others later. And it also creates limitation for us right now. And my part of my experience evolved, it wasn't planned, even though when I was going through my master's program and being trained as a therapist, one of the main dreams that was pulling me through was that I wanted to be a therapist in a hospice setting and, start a nonprofit that would connect people with all they needed in terms of healing resources. And that started growing. And I was like, I don't even know what this is, why this is showing up, where it's going to lead. I didn't end up going down the path of, working as a licensed therapist. And that actually led me to having the opportunity to sit with people and families when they were in conscious dying. And that showed me how much anxiety and almost unspoken truths people carry that deserve space. They deserve space to be spoken. And it's not necessarily in a therapy session or in a recovery program. It may be in, going and sitting outside and sitting next to someone quietly on a bench, or, sharing a memory, or, something simple. And I had contrasting experiences with what it looks like and what it feels like to go through a transition, a death that is unplanned, comes out of nowhere, and there's nothing taken care of. And I've gone through a very conscious, aware, we know that we're in a shorter stretch of time, and actually planning a funeral, putting things in order, having conversations about it. And one versus the other, both brought gifts. And one was much more grounded than the other, and that's shaped me. That's shaped this work, because, the unplanned death that had a lot of unknowns, unfamiliar, was my dad's. And one of the others that I was just speaking to that was really conscious and conscious, and there was an intimacy in the process, before I was officially a death doula, was actually my grandmother. So being able to experience both and the sacredness in both has really informed me. And also the trauma in my dad's has shaped so much of how I'm showing up in the world now, because it was really painful. It was the death is painful, let alone having all of these details to tend to, and not having a roadmap, being in the midst of grief. You're like, what do I even do here? What would my dad want me to do? Like, I have no idea. And that was an experience I know a lot of people have. And it's also something that the practical part of me, the part of me that's like, okay, let's write a list, and let's reverse engineer so we can bring some healing forwards and backwards, is like, there's another way. And that got me to start looking at the relationships that I had around me, and also my own planning. If there was an emergency, am I prepared? Do people in my life know what to do with my dog, where I've hidden cash, where are my car keys, like simple things. And those details, Michelle, having them clear for myself has also shown me how powerful the simple is. And I want other people to have access to that, on a day-to-day basis. I hope I'm not even midlife, like I've got time, maybe, or maybe not. We all have one day, that I'm not consciously facing my mortality.
Yeah.
And these details still matter because I think about them. And life is unpredictable.
I also wonder if I think oftentimes people feel like this is so scary, I want to avoid. And I know for myself, the reflection has actually deepened the meaning in my day to day. And it'd be great if you wanted to speak to that a little bit, because I think you and I have spoken about Pema Chadron. She wrote a book, how you live is how you live is how you die,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a powerful book, because I think there is something to be, I mean, her title is just amazing, right? So we can extrapolate from it, but there is something to be said how reflecting on one's death, not obsessing about it, not like, grieving every day or freaking out, but to just be mindful, right? Because we can get really stuck in loops. And so I think there's a gift, and especially in using someone like you to stay accountable to that, right? Because we get pulled in so many different directions, where all of a sudden we look up and we're like, oh my God, we're 70. How did this happen? And all these things. And so I love that you can be this like little gem for us that we like a little nugget, that we could plug in into our week. And I'm wondering if you want to speak to that, how you can be used in that capacity for someone like, in their 40s, I mean, 50s, that it doesn't have to be this daily activity, that it could be this, because you had mentioned like this could be a slow and steady process. It's not like a one and done.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about the how we live is how we die. I was just listening to something on mindfulness and groundlessness that Pema was a short clip with her. And I think about this as uh, she was talking about mindfulness and groundlessness and being, mindfulness really creates a sense of grounding. And at the same time, we can realize that there is no ground, that we just are, right? And this gets to be a mindfulness practice. Life gets to be a mindfulness practice when it's chosen. And how we live is defined by what we prioritize. And what we prioritize illuminates what we value. And a values-driven life is typically one that feels meaningful. And isn't that the point? No, that to live meaningfully for what that means for me, for you, and meaningful living gets to be experienced by investing in ourselves and setting aside, what do we set aside, every week, once a day? People prioritize therapy, people prioritize quiet time, people prioritize massages, family dinners, walks with the dog, recovery meetings, you name it. Everything that's prioritized reflects a core value. And one of the elements with clients that I've worked with one-on-one and families is having, like, we have sessions, and that is the time to bring in, what's been coming up, what wants to be talked about. There's like a download of all of the to-dos, the anxieties, the questions, and then being able to create a map and go through them step by step. Or come in, like, this is the time that we're going to look at where there's uncertainty and create some certainty together. So there's a tangible takeaway. There's practical application, not just awareness. And that's where this does actually get to be really empowering and get to see the process where, talking about living and dying can be very vague. It's like,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
intimidating also to talk about something where it's like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just going to maybe go down a rabbit hole. Every rabbit hole that we go down turns into a tunnel, and the tunnel leads somewhere. And I'm very committed to that because one, there's an integrity piece, and get things in order. Let's get some things in order. So there is, there's ground to stand on for you and your loved ones. And also because this is really sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Our lives are sacred. So how we're organizing them and what we're investing in matters. And that gets to be paced over time. I've walked people through most of their paperwork and planning that they've wanted to through a checklist I created in 8 weeks. Think about an hour or two a week for 8 weeks, and there's a values driven, heart centered path forward, a map to potentially follow or that other people can reference as time passes. It's pretty powerful.
Well, and what I could say is that you are a very skilled organizer in so many different capacities for Hirschman Clinical. I mean, I know back in the day, I mean, you've also been used to like organize people's home, like the organizational component, I can only imagine would be so useful. Like, because you're dealing with such big concepts, and to be able to land the plane and help people kind of feel more grounded with this map plan. I'm so grateful that you're doing that for us. you know.
And it's like what we do, with coaching. You just mentioned like home organizations, like people have their niches
Mhm.
and the worlds that for one person walking, what we do, what you do in creating these creative healing plans for clients and families, some people would look at that and go, there's no way, you know, and you bring your heart and experience and it happens. So same, we get to reach out and ask for support and be willing to receive it in areas where we have less confidence or familiarity. Um, so that's what we do here too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm thinking about kind of these dozens of families that we are currently working with that are aging, and they have these adult children, and the adult children have chronic mental health, or mostly chronic mental health issues, and they want to make sure they're taken care of. And that is complicated and difficult, and emotional, to get real about, that their loved one is doing okay, and they're going to need like long-term support and things in place, and to put words to it,
Mm.
and walking through the emotional components, and also being practical. And I imagine that that's going to be, that's how you're going to be able to serve a lot of the HCS families. Is that correct? Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, so it takes a village.
Mhm.
It takes a village to create anything sustainable. And within, the work of Hirschman Clinical Services, there's so much that happens with one-on-one and the growth and transformation that gets to happen with an individual. And at the same time, families are moving along with their own process of what it looks like to watch the transformation, but also prepare for what follows. And where there's already a case management and family coaching piece uh, in place for what's happening currently, there also gets to be one for what's coming. And that requires something different. What happens in present day conversations is going to bring out one set of emotions or perspectives. What will come out when there's a real pause to look at, what's potentially coming down the road in 10 years. That requires um, a different environment. And so having support in the day-to-day current time, and having support looking from, into the future and from a future perspective, that's where you and I get to tag team and hold space for different parts of the spectrum or timeline. Uh, you've said this in a recent podcast that, you hold space as a therapist, and when you're holding space as a therapist, you're not holding space as a coach or, a mom or fill in the blank. You have a core role. And that's one of the pieces uh, I have so much vision for us together, is to be able to both hold space for what's happening currently and what's coming for the same families, for the same people. Um, it feels like a hug, really, to be circled around. And that brings me back to like, it takes a village. Um, what's required now and what's required later might look different. And there gets to be support, there gets to be sacred presence uh, through all of that.
Yeah, I mean, we're really breaking open things that people haven't been talking about, and that it's happening to them, versus being proactive like that. And I'm actually, thinking about just the mental health industry, like all these, families that are taking care of their loved ones, and then they start dying, right? And their loved one is left, and then who's going to make choices on their behalf, right? And to be able to empower our clients to have a voice, And I'll give example to our audience. Like there is a client that we're currently working with, and I'm educating her, and we're going to be bringing in Darcy to collaborate with her, because we could speak in a way that's simple, especially Darcy, who's so skilled in this, to be able to help her make choices like, hey, when your mom's not here, you're gonna need some, she doesn't have family, you know you need to have a voice on how you want things to go down as you age, right? And making these making these choices, and to say these things not in a scary way, because it needs to be said. It needs to not be avoided, right? um and she does have friends and some extended family that she might want to make choices with, regarding the resources that she has left, since she doesn't have any children or fur babies, that she might want to make some of those choices as well. And you don't know what you don't know unless you've got someone like Darcy who's educating you and helping you through the process. um, so I'm just so grateful, Darcy, that we get to collaborate like this and speak about some of these hard things that don't have to be so hard, but can be tender and loving, and break open our heart, but in like beautiful ways.
And it's such a way to honor ourselves. It's really pioneering
Mhm.
to look at life right now for everybody listening, like pausing to take in, the Creative Healing Podcast, and what gets talked about here is uh it's an act of self-love and investment. And I'm going to pause and consider what matters to me in a world that's very busy, that there's so much noise and static, and there's a lot of fear out there, and there's a lot of distraction from what might actually matter. And this gets to be an invitation back into what matters to me, what matters to me now, and how do I want that to be reflected in my day-to-day life and moving forward, and when I'm not here. So this gets to be about sovereignty. It gets to be about self-discovery. It's practical, it brings structure to what feels overwhelming, but this is also legacy work.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and that lights me up. We all get to
Yeah,
be in
that just lit
legacy
me up when you
now.
said the word legacy. I'm like, yes. But it's true. And I think, for the audience out there, like, guys, there's stop putting it off. I'm this is this episode's actually going to re-inspire me to really carve out the space and time. I had started, I think I told you, Darcy, speaking of legacy, in my early 40s, I started this document called A Letter to My Kiddos. And I started inputting when I had kind of a download, or I learned something that they're too young to kind of share with now, but I wanted them to know about mama, or about a life lesson, or something that I just wanted to make sure I was marking down so that they could use it. Because I felt like I didn't, and I still don't like the way that my dad kind of transitioned. Like I almost wish I had like a cheat sheet from him. I have to like remember it from my brain. But it'd be so great, to have these kind of pieces. But I need the accountability, because once again, you get pulled, and yet that is so important to me, to my legacy, for myself and for my children, to have this piece, and that's just one of like a lot of other things that we need to kind of tend to in this process. So I am so grateful that you're doing this kind of work and can help people like us and all different sorts of people to just begin the dialogue and to do it gently. Darcy is one of the most skilled. I mean, if you talk to any of her clients, she's just so skilled in going at a pace that is gentle but yet practical. That's a hard one to go back and forth towards, where like a client ends a session and they feel the flow, and that yet, and they also are feeling like they're moving forward in some kind of way. And so I can only imagine the beauty and gifts of you facilitating this, in the death process. So do you have any final words, Darcy, about this?
an invitation for everybody listening to pause and consider, think about, I'll pose a question. What matters to you? You know, what do you want to give more attention to in your life right now? And can you pause for a minute and just take note of it? And second question is, is there anxiety around something that you've been avoiding that you can pause and just pause and consider? Make a mental note. And then ask both, what's one action that I can take to meet you where you want to be met? They're both asking for needs to be met. Anxiety is a signal, and so is inspiration. That's what I want to leave everyone with. And you know where to find us if you want to find out more. I have a Substack that I've just started. We just had an interview with Wendy Adamson, who's just aired on the podcast, and she's talking about creative healing through writing. And writing is one of the practices that I've brought in, and I bring in with clients also because where so much wisdom comes. So a little writing to end it, inspired by Wendy and the podcast. And so much gratitude for you, Michelle, and creating this space where conversations get to happen that don't happen many other places. It has a real impact. We hear from people all the time about a line in an episode or a topic, and just how encouraging it is to have this type of community. So I'm so grateful to be here every week.
Thank you, Darcy. And I'm so grateful to you because it wouldn't fully be launched without my co-pilot. So I appreciate you and all your gifts. And I'm so glad that you're doing this work and that you're going to create the ripple out there. And I'm here to support it. So thank you.
Let's create the ripple.
Let's do it.